Hello, today we're going to discuss Chapter 10, Motivating Your Employees. Think about it. As you guys are going to be future entrepreneurs, you're going to own your own business. You will be motivated to do well. However, most of the time, the people who are going to make or break your business will be your employees, and your job is to make sure that they are motivated. We do this through two basic things: intrinsic rewards on this slide and extrinsic rewards on the next slide. Intrinsic rewards are personal satisfaction you feel when you perform well and complete goals. In essence, it's the belief that your work as an employee makes a significant contribution to the organization or society. So you see this through such things as internal things such as internal pride in your performance and a sense of overall achievement. So for instance, when I see a student do really well in class, I get a lot of intrinsic rewards. Compare and contrast intrinsic rewards with extrinsic rewards. Extrinsic rewards are rewards or something given as a recognition of good work. And as the slide points out, examples of extrinsic rewards include such things as promotions, pay raises, or awards. Now we're going to come back to both intrinsic and extrinsic rewards in a second, but at least I wanted to give you the basic foundation. The following slides, we're going to talk about several theories to motivate employees. The first theory I want to bring up is with regards to scientific management. Scientific management was put forth by Frederick Taylor, and under scientific management, we study workers to find both the most efficient ways of doing things and then teaching people those techniques in order to motivate people to do things quickly and more effectively and thus be more productive. So the three key elements to increase productivity are time, methods of work, and then rules of work. In essence, what we do is we take a stopwatch to time all activities to find the things that work the fastest. So to break this down theory, time motion studies under scientific management are studies of which tasks must be performed to complete a job and then time it to each task. And really all this timing led to what's known as the principle of motion economy. Every single job or task can be broken down into a series of elementary motions. Many companies today even still follow Frederick Taylor in his notion of scientific management. For instance, the company UPS employs this. UPS drivers work under very strict rules and requirements. They are taught how to get out of their trucks. They must use their right foot first. How fast to walk. They must walk 3 feet per second. And even as draconian as how to hold their keys. Teeth up and use the third finger. How would you like to work for a company that follows Frederick Taylor and times everything to find out what's most efficient? So inspired by Frederick Taylor, then Elton Mayo, a Harvard professor, conducted what's known as the Hawthorne studies. And the Hawthorne studies were done, is named after the Hawthorne plant in Cicero, Illinois. And under this, Elton Mayo researched by studying workers' efficiency under different levels of stimuli, such as things as light, heat, humidity, etc. And what he found out was pretty amazing, that productivity increased regardless of the light, how light it was or how dark it was. And so the researchers under Henry Mayo decided there were human or psychological factors at play, and this became known as the Hawthorne effect. The Hawthorne effect says that people act differently when they know they are being watched or studied. In essence, they will work harder and be more productive when they're being watched. Thus, research shifted from Frederick Taylor's scientific management towards Elton Mayo's Hawthorne effect or human-based management. The third theory I want to talk about is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This is a theory of motivation based on unmet human needs, from basic physiological needs, then to safety, social, esteem, and self-actualizations. And the idea behind this is that needs that have already been met do not motivate anymore, because you've already got those. You're not motivated by them. If a need is filled, you move up to another higher level need that will emerge. And a visual representation will help understand this more. As you can see, we have physiological needs at the bottom, and then other needs become more important, move up the pyramid. And so the idea here is that unless your physiological needs are met, such as food and water, you're not even worried about safety. Once your food and water is met, then you worry about safety. When those needs are met, you move up to the next one, being social. Once you feel like your social needs are met, you move on to your own self-esteem, and then finally to your self-actualization needs. Another type of theory to look at is Frederick Hertzberg in his motivating factor, in his two-factor analysis. So Frederick Hertzberg here in the mid-1960s his research focused on two questions. First, what factors controlled by managers have the most effect on increasing worker motivation? Second, how do workers rank these job-related factors of importance related to motivation? And the results were very interesting. He found out that job content factors were the most important to workers. Workers like to feel that they actually contribute to the company. These were motivating factors that cause employees to be more productive and ultimately give these employees satisfaction. Those are motivating factors. The second factors were hygiene factors. These are also factors that cause dissatisfaction if they're missing, but do not necessarily motivate employees if increased. So again, to recap, Hertzberg had two different factors: motivating factors and non-motivating factors, otherwise known as hygiene factors. So motivating factors can be used to actually motivate workers. And notice this is very intrinsic type of rewards, the work itself or achievement. Whereas hygiene or non-motivating factors, these factors cause dissatisfaction if missing, but changing them or increasing them will have little motivational effect, such as salary status, working conditions. So for instance, if you take away my pay, I'll be pissed off. That'll cause me dissatisfaction. However, if you increase my pay by 50%, I'm not going to work 50% harder. The next slide is very interesting. It's a comparison of Maslow hierarchy of needs that we talked about before, with Hertzberg hygiene factors at the bottom and motivational factors near the top. Take a moment and study these and compare and contrast. Next type of theory I want to talk about is known as Theory X and Theory Y type of managers, and this was proposed by Douglas McGregor. He stated that managers had two different sets of assumptions concerning the workers that work beneath them, and that their attitudes about motivating workers were tied to these basic assumptions, and he called these Theory X managers or Theory Y managers. Theory X managers made the assumption that the employees that work for them dislike work and thus seek to avoid it, and that in order to motivate them, they must be threatened with punishment in order to motivate these workers to perform. Theory X managers feel that workers prefer to be directed and thus avoid responsibility. So the primary motivators of Theory X managers are fear and punishment upon the employee. Compare and contrast theory X with theory Y managers. It's the opposite. Here, managers assume that the employees that work beneath them like their job and assume that work is just part of their life, just like play or rest. And give people creativity to get the jobs done. And that people are motivated by a variety of rewards. So they really emphasize a relaxed management atmosphere, and empowerment can be found in the following 3 steps. Number 1, find out what people think the problem in the organization are. Number 2, let those people design the solutions. And number 3, just get out of the way and let the employees put the solutions into action. That's theory X and theory Y. To complicate things a little bit, William Ochi came out with a new theory, theory Z. And William Ochi of UCLA researched the cultural differences between 2 cultures, the United States as denoted by type A, and Japanese cultural differences as denoted by type J. He noted that type J, or Japan, is committed to the organization, the company, or the collective group, whereas type A, or the United States, is focused on the individual. He came up with a theory which is a hybrid approach between type A, America, and type J, Japan, and this is known as theory Z, which we can look at on the next slide. Under theory Z, which is the one in green in the middle here, it's a compromise between the draconian approaches found in type A and type J. So for instance, looking at the first one, Americans under type A prefer short-term employment or being bouncing around from job to job if they don't like it. Remember, type J in Japan preferred the organization and the collectiveness. They look to lifetime employment. Type Z, which is the modified approach, looks to long-term employment, not necessarily lifetime or short-term employment. So I want you to look at the differences between type A and type J and find sort of the middle ground that can be found in William Ochi's type Z. To further compare and contrast, we look at the difference between theory X and theory Y of Douglas McGregor in the first 2 columns, and theory Z of William Ochi. It can be found in the right-hand column. Another theory I want to talk about is known as goal-setting theory. And under goal-setting theory here, what we do is we set ambitious but attainable goals. So the goals got to be ambitious, but they got to be attainable. And if they are, that can motivate workers or employees, and therefore improving performance if the goals are accepted by the employees, accompanied by feedback from the managers, and facilitated by the overall company conditions. How do we apply goal-setting theory? Well, one approach by the legendary Professor Peter Drucker back in the 60s is through what's known as management by objectives, or MBO. MBO involves a cycle of discussion, review, and evaluation of objectives simply among both top and middle level managers, supervisors, and employees. And here, really the idea under management by objective is to set up the individual employees' objectives in a similar fashion to the overall company objectives. So look at the very top of MBO on this slide is to set organizational objectives or company objectives. And then notice on the right side is then as the arrow goes down is to link the overall company objectives to the employee goals. So if you work for Nissan, the objective is to sell as many cars. So that's the organizational objective. Then the employee's goals as a salesperson should be to sell as many cars as he or she can. The employee's goals meet the organizational objectives. Then, as Peter Drucker said, you should monitor, evaluate, and reward performance. So watching everything and providing feedback along the way. few more theories to talk about. Let's next talk about expectancy theory. You may not have heard of expectancy theory, but you certainly have put it into play in your own life. Under expectancy theory, it's simply the amount of effort employees exert on a specific task will depend on their expectations of the outcome. So employees will always ask three vital questions. Can I accomplish the task? If I can, what's the reward? And finally, is the reward worth the effort I put in? And expectations will vary from person to person or employee to employee because it's subjective. A great visual representation of expectancy theory can be found in the next slide. In essence, it's a yes and move on or a no and stop theory. Can I accomplish the task? If I can, then you're still motivated. If I can't, you see you're no longer motivated. Even if I can accomplish the task, what's the reward and is the reward worth the effort? If I can accomplish the task, but the reward is not worth the effort, I'm still not going to be motivated. You're only motivated if you can both accomplish the task, know the reward, and is the reward worth the effort? Nadler and Lawler modified the expectancy theory and suggested 5 steps for managers in order to help motivate employees, as you can see here on this slide. Two other theories I want to talk about. The first one is reinforcement theory. And under reinforcement theory, here, positive and negative reinforcers will motivate a person to behave in certain ways because really what they're doing is trying to avoid either punishment or extinction. Positive reinforcement will help people behave in a certain way. So when you include such things as praise, an intrinsic reward, or an extrinsic reward such as praise or pay, or recognition, that's positive reinforcement. Negative reinforcement occurs when people work to escape punishment. They're only working to escape punishment, such as being reprimanded or having their pay reduced, or in the extreme position, being laid off or fired. So people try to avoid punishment, such as reprimands, reduced pay, or fired. A sort of interesting approach through reinforcement is really not reinforcing, but the opposite, which is known as extinction, is a way of managers trying to stop behavior by just simply ignoring it or not responding to it. And the idea is if an employee is doing bad, if you just don't even give them attention, they'll eventually stop the bad behavior. The final theory I want to talk about today is equity theory. Under equity theory, employees themselves try to maintain equity within their own workforce between inputs and outputs because they compare the inputs and outputs of them compared to others in similar positions. It's all based on perception, and perceptions are not always the same because when you have perceived inequalities, can lead to reduced quality and productivity, absenteeism, or even resignation. And the idea is if you work really hard but don't get the promotion, why even bother working hard? Or if you don't have to work hard and you do get the promotion, then you don't really have to work hard ever again. So let's move away from different types of theories and now go into sort of a new idea of not theory, but now how do you apply these theories? And one way you can apply these various theories is through the notion of job enrichment. And job enrichment is a strategy to motivate, and emphasizing motivating the work through the job itself. And this is sort of piggybacking on Frederick Herzberg's motivating factors, such as responsibility, achievement, and recognition, and not its hygiene factors. So the idea is that these intrinsic motivators give people responsibility, give them recognition, and a combination of internal and external rewards will enrich their jobs. A second way to look at is the notion of communication. And we talked about this in a previous chapter when we talked about managers need to be more transparent back in chapter 7. And the idea is having a organization that fosters open communication. So create a culture or organizational culture that rewards listening and have an open line of communication. So removing barriers to open communication. So anyone should feel comfortable about talking to anyone in the organization. But here it all goes to recognizing good work. And these are both the intrinsic and extrinsic rewards we talked about at the beginning of the chapter. So a lot of these here are extrinsic factors: paid time off, paid care for help for child care or elder care, stock options, company awards, etc. This slide is a visual representation of positive remedies for employee morale. So when managers and companies practice open communication, have programs that recognize good work, provide awards, monetary awards, even the unexpected rewards, that helps reinforce positive employee morale. The next slide looks at negative actions for employee morale or bad employee morale. It's the opposite: lack of the open communication, failure to recognize achievements, and managers who micromanage their employees or provide an excessive amount of work is bad for employee morale. Let's look at motivating employees, not just here in the US, but across the globe. Cultures usually are in one of two categories: either high context cultures or low context cultures. High context cultures really require relationships and trust before performance can work. A lot of countries in Asia, such as Japan, China, etc., are high context cultures. In the United States and other Western European countries, they're much more low context cultures, believe relationship building is a distraction from getting the work done. Just give me the task and I'll get it done, and I don't need to build relationships. And so really whenever you do business abroad, it's important to have a better understanding of cultures. So it's not just knowing other languages, it's knowing what's proper. So for instance, when I used to be in private industry and we would go meet with clients from Japan, the idea was before we even talked business, we did a round of golf and had dinner, and it wasn't until the end of the round of golf or dinner that we talked business, because they come from a high context culture that wants to build team building and trust first. Final part of today's lecture, we want to look at motivating employees across different generations, because not all employees are the same. There are age differences and generational differences, and with those come different ways to motivate employees. Let's first look at baby boomers. Baby boomers are the people who were born between 1946 and 1964. As you can see, because they grew up after World War II, they experienced great economic prosperity, and they have very optimistic about their future. They saw really the greatest economic growth during their lifetime than any country's ever seen. People born in Generation X, like myself, between the years 1965 and 1980, look at things differently. They were raised in oftentimes dual career families. Because of that, they attended daycare, and they're much more insecure about their jobs. Many of you guys might fall in this category, might be right before that, are known as Gen Y or millennials. And they were raised by parents who were very indulgent, wants versus needs. They're used to many comforts that a modern economy brings them, such as access to computers, cell phones, the internet, etc. most of you guys are actually Gen Zers. You grew up post 9/11, the terrorist attacks in the wake of the Great Recession of 2007, 2008, and a lot of violence, such as school violence. And the newest generation that we haven't really seen come to fruition yet, these are people who are 10 and under, are Generation Alpha. So let's look at some of these different generations in the workplace. Generation X, remember here, they desire economic security. However, they focus more on career security than job security. So Gen Xers like myself, they tend to be flexible and are good at collaboration, and they're very effective at giving employee feedback. However, look at the difference between Gen X and Gen Y, or millennials. Millennials act a lot differently on average than Gen Xers. Millennials or Generation Y tend to be impatient, they're blunt, and they're very expressive because they grew up with access to be able to talk and be able to voice their opinions. Gen Ys or millennials are much more tech savvy and able to grasp new concepts. They place a high value on what's known as a work-life balance or experiences, and they want to have fun while they are working. Because of that, there's different communication across the generations. So baby boomers, the generation before me, they like in-person meetings and conference calls. Gen Xers like myself prefer to communicate via email where they can get their thoughts across in long paragraphs, but maybe don't need to have face-to-face meetings. Gen Ys or millennials don't like to have meetings in person, and they view emails antiquated. Rather, they prefer to use technology to communicate, and usually to communicate through such things as social media. This concludes the lecture on Chapter 10, Motivating Employees.